Hey, landlords. This week on the podcast, we are going to be talking about ways that you can take more control in not only your life as a landlord, but just life in general.
Welcome to the RentPrep for Landlords podcast. And now your hosts, Stephen White and Eric Worrell.
All right. As the show title suggests, this is 7 Habits of Highly Successful Landlords. And Steve, I know that you've read the book before. You know what I'm talking about, by Stephen R. Covey.
Read the book. Years and years ago, I was in sales. So for anybody that's been in sales, between Stephen Covey and Zig Ziglar, I mean, those guys are, they wrote the Bibles basically for salespeople. So yes, I've read the book. It's been years, but I remember a lot of the concepts of it. And I love the idea of taking the concept of some highly effective habits and putting in the lens of a landlord, and it works.
Yeah, I was reading this book recently, and a lot of times I find myself when I'm consuming any kind of content, I'm kind of looking through the lens of a landlord, even more so now just because of working at RentPrep. And one of the concepts in the book really kind of stuck with me. And basically what it was talking about how to increase your control over your life. And Stephen Covey, who is now passed, he put this through a really simple technique, and he had a drawing. And basically, if you could imagine a big circle and then a smaller circle inside of it. So the smaller circle is called the circle of influence, and that is everything that you can control in your life. And then the bigger circle, which encompasses that smaller circle, is called the circle of concern, and it's everything that you can't control in your life. And I was kind of reading this, and he said, basically, if you can take that smaller circle and you can make it larger, so you expand the size of that smaller circle, and you expand the control that you have in your life, that you have more balance, you feel better about things because you find yourself worrying about things less that you can't control and taking control of more things that maybe you thought you couldn't even control to begin with. I was thinking about this, and I was reading this, and I was like, all right, well, how has this happened as my life as a landlord? Because I'm going on 8 years of owning a duplex. And I realized that several times that this has happened. So probably the first most inexperienced mistake that I made was I did not have a lease originally with some tenants that I had living below me, because it was a duplex that I was house hacking. And because I didn't have a lease, I didn't have a late fee policy. And I started having a tenant that was habitually paying late on rent. And I kind of found myself in the circle of concern, because I was just that person who was annoyed by something but wasn't doing anything about it. And finally, I instituted my first lease with the runners. And I told them there's going to be a late fee policy. You're going to pay $5 every day after the 5th of the month, because here in New York State, there's a 5-day grace period that you're late on the rent. And suddenly that tenant that was a problem every single month paying rent suddenly was paying rent on time every single month. And I hadn't read the book at that point, but looking back at that story, I realized, I'm like, yeah, that was a kind of an example of where I stopped just being somebody complaining in my own mind about somebody or a situation, and took control of the situation and took it from the circle of concern and moved it into the circle of influence. And I just thought that was pretty interesting looking back on that.
Yeah, it's funny. Something that I catch myself saying a lot is landlords create their own problems, right? And this is a perfect example. Not that you caused that guy to pay late, but by not having that system in place, that was a problem that was well within your control, but you weren't doing anything to control it. And so, yeah, I make the connection here on exactly what you're saying. A lot of things that landlords kind of find frustrating are things that they surprisingly do have a lot more control over. It just takes a couple of steps, or takes an addendum or some sort of change that now eliminates that issue. Before we jumped on live here, you were mentioning a couple other things to me, and I thought, again, were great examples. Do you want to just run through a couple of those things, like the lights and the locks and things like that?
Yeah. Being that this was a shared, duplex, the basement, which was a common area, was shared, and that's where the laundry was. And I was getting so annoyed because the tenants and even some of my roommates at the time kept leaving the lights on downstairs. And months, I'm talking like probably a year of seeing that. And I'd go down the driveway and I'd see the light on in the basement. I'd go down to the basement, I'd flip the light switch off. And I just get so annoyed by it. And changing somebody's habits in that way is very difficult. If there's somebody who leaves lights on, they leave lights on. So I went to Home Depot. I bought a couple of these like twist-in light sensors that cost about $14. And now when you go into the basement of that rental property, the lights turn on and they turn off about 5 minutes after you leave.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah, it was just a classic example of like I was kind of a victim for a long time of like, oh, why can't they just, be more of an adult or something, or whatever story I was telling myself. and realizing that there was a $14 fix sitting out there and I could just forget about it.
Yeah, another great example that I know a lot of landlords run into is lockouts, where tenant locks themselves out of their apartment. And I know you said that you were running into some of these issues too. And sometimes the easiest fix in that case is installing a deadbolt. You have to lock it from the outside. You have to purposely lock it, meaning
Your keys are on you, right?
Yeah, your keys have to be on you. You can't just pull the door shut behind you and go, oh, shoot, I locked the handle and now I'm stuck because my keys are on the kitchen table. So something as simple as that even could save you a lot of frustrating phone calls from tenants saying, hey, I locked myself out again. Sorry.
Yeah, and one of the things, if you follow along, we have a YouTube channel too where I kind of put out a weekly video of just some sort of helpful tip as a landlord. And one of the things I've been working through is this concept of the ICE method. And it kind of incorporates this circle of influence into it. And basically it's, ICE is being an acronym. First is start with the I, identify the situation. I think a lot of times as a landlord, you kind of go into something, and I definitely, that tenant that was paying me rent late habitually. I don't know why I think I like saying that word habitually. It's just you get to say habitch.
Yeah.
And you don't feel bad about it. We're still a PG podcast, But anyways, I think I had a lot of lenses and filters that I was viewing that tenant through. There was other things that he was doing that were bothering me, and it was changing the way that I was looking at that tenant. So I think one of the first steps is just kind of identify maybe the filter that you might have of the situation. Maybe identify the fact that you're enjoying the idea of complaining about that situation in your mind and you're actually not taking any kind of action on it, because sometimes it's intoxicating to just fester on things,
That is probably, if there's any key takeaway on this entire podcast episode, it's that right there. Having that level of self-awareness enough to say, wait, I'm in a cycle here. And maybe it's hard to even admit that you enjoy it, but it's hard to look at all the facts sometimes or evidence and say, there's not some part of you that is making the same mistakes over and over or allowing the same mistakes over and over. And maybe it's not enjoying, but maybe that's the cycle that you're stuck in and sort of you're just chasing your tail. So yeah, first and foremost, I think you have to have some level of self-awareness to say, wait, maybe I'm not doing everything right. And I think that's where I get the saying that landlords create their own problems. I think that's what it is. It's a willful blindness to maybe a better way.
Yeah.
And instead of working on that better way, it's just easier to do things the way you are and complain. And that just ends up turning into who you are.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the last step of as far as the identify part of the acronym is just to be able to identify if you're maybe being an emotional landlord. And we talked about that a lot. Don't go into a situation making emotional decision making, because it could end up biting you in the long run. The next step is really just the C of the ICE is categorize. So in the instance of my tenants, leaving the lights on constantly in the basement, you categorize, is this something that falls into the circle of concern or the circle of influence? Again, the circle of influence being the smaller circle. And for a long time, I was categorizing it as something that I couldn't control. I can't make them turn off the lights. I'm not going to institute some sort of, fee for leaving the lights on. And I think I just, more so than anything, wasn't being creative enough in my thinking. And then when I kind of took some time to think about it and realizing like, hey, there's ways I can take control of this situation, I was able to recategorize it. And I think the last step, which a lot of us fall short on in many aspects of life, is actually eliminating the problem. Actually taking the time to schedule some time in your calendar and making a commitment of, I'm going to take care of this. Mm-hmm. Because frankly, someone leaving the lights on or somebody getting locked out every 3 months, or, that little annoying noise that's, bothers you in your apartment that you could fix, or whatever that situation was that I was running into, they're pretty easy to ignore because they annoy you in the moment, but then you get over it.
You want me to give you a really good example?
Yeah.
I've got a crack in my windshield.
I thought you were going to say that.
Yeah. What's it been, about a month now?
That might be being generous. It might be a little bit longer.
Yeah, might be. All I got to do is call the insurance company. That's it. It's a phone call. And my mindset is, I'll deal with it. And it's, of course, gotten longer. Now it stretches the entire length of the windshield. My car's not going to pass inspection. It's causing all kinds of other problems that I haven't had to face yet, but I will. And yeah, I'm sort of willfully ignoring this. And
so you've identified that there's an issue. You know what the issue is.
I know
you've
what the
categorized
issue is.
that
Yes.
it is something that you actually can take control of, as simple as with a phone call, but you just haven't eliminated it.
Correct.
And you know what? I still have this theory that I think it's intoxicating sometimes, because you can just think about it and you're like, I'll get around to it. And it's just, you kind of fall into those ruts with some of the issues that kind of swirl around you. And I don't think that's a big one,
No, but I think in some ways too, there's almost like a weird false sense of control because I'm choosing to not take care of it, that I feel like I am in control of it instead of eliminating the problem.
Yeah.
Which is really the ultimate control.
Yeah. And I think, you can argue whether or not, somebody gets some kind of enjoyment out of not taking action on things. But I don't think you can argue the fact that everyone would appreciate kind of like more balance and just kind of like a relaxed nature in their life. And the argument that this guy, Stephen R. Covey, makes is that if you can widen that circle of influence and you can take more control of things in your life and then start just complaining less about the things you can't control. Because there's always going to be things you can't control. And when I think about landlords, as far as those things, a lot of times I think of government regulations that get handed down. I know you've spoken before at an REI club, and you'll start talking about certain things and regulations that the government has as far as the way you can screen tenants, and you can just see the palpable tension just raise in the room, and people love to complain about that stuff. But at the same time, if it's something that's regulated and you can't control it and it's not something you can fight, maybe you're wasting calories and energy just fighting a battle that you can't change,
Right. Yeah, you've got to be the change for sure. Yeah, it's funny how I think people take information. You're either kind of hardwired to be the type of person that thinks, why me, why us, why landlords, why is it never fair? I live in a state that favors tenants. It's, I'm never going to win. Instead of maybe just changing your thought process or changing your point of view, changing that lens that you might be looking through, like we talk about, and make some possibly easy changes that eliminates your exposure to certain things or eliminates a frustration like leaving every day and seeing the lights are on. It's such a perfect example, I think, because everybody can relate. I go through my house sometimes, like a madman from one room to another, turning off lights because I've got a wife and son that have no concept of, shutting a light off when they leave the room, and it drives me crazy. So I get it. And, in that case, what are you going to do? Like you said, are you going to put expectations on them? Am I going to continue to hammer them, or am I going to do something that fixes the problem automatically? And I think in cases for landlords, don't try to fix your tenants. You picked them. You got to take them for what they are. Set up situations that you're going to succeed, like in cases where you put the timers on it or the deadbolt or little things like that are tenant proof.
Yeah. And I think sometimes too, you can kind of almost put a dollar value on what your peace of mind's worth. So maybe it's something where it's like, well, I shouldn't have to put a deadbolt on. They should just learn how to bring their keys with them. They should have better habits. But you know what? If that deadbolt costs you $20-$30, and I'll throw a plug out for Kwikset. They sent us actually a couple free different deadbolts and things of that nature. They actually sent us one that's really cool, where it's just a punch-in keypad that we actually use at the office here, which I know I love. I don't know about you, Steve.
I love it. I don't have to carry keys anymore. It's amazing.
Yeah. And it's just like, it's a cool feature that you could put on your rental property.
Yeah.
But I think as a landlord, sometimes it's like, well, no, they should be the one that's going to, mature or something like that. But instead, you can just take control of the situation. You can spend the $45 and not have to worry about that lockout call that's going to come every 2-3 months because you have a tenant that forgets their keys.
Right. Well, all right. Now let's look at this from the point of view of some people, like my father. I'm going to use as a good example. Sorry, Dad, but you really are a perfect example for this. My dad was a landlord. Growing up, my dad was a landlord. He's the type of person that will drive 10 extra miles to save 10 cents at a pop machine or a soda machine. I realize we're in Western New York here and we all call it pop machines, but everywhere else in the world, it's a soda. So, you go to a soda machine that maybe sits outside of a grocery store or something like that. I remember as even as a kid, my dad we'd drive to the next town and he'd say, it's because the soda machines are 10 cents cheaper over there, not realizing he's easily spending double, triple, however many multiplications of that in gas to get there. So in a lot of ways, I think people are kind of hard set to think a certain way, and it's difficult to break that mindset. So for a landlord that might be in that situation, I hate to use the word closed-mindedness, let's just say stuck inside of a thought pattern.
Yeah.
Okay. Instead of closed-mindedness. You got a landlord who's stuck inside of a thought pattern who wants to, and like maybe you said, maybe they're getting some sort of fulfillment out of complaining about the tenants or complaining about their situation or poor me. Look at the life that I've got now here. I got to worry about tenants leaving lights on.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Well, I think sometimes too, that thought pattern that you're talking about, a lot of landlords look at it as a very combative nature. It's tenant versus landlord, and that's what you're going to go in with. And I'm going to keep as much money as I can. I'm not going to let them, mess with my stuff. I own this. This is mine. And really, it's just like, no, they're an imperfect human. You're an imperfect human. And what you can do is you can try to figure out what is the most practical way that I can live the best life that I want to live, and not look at things through the lens of like, I'm going to win, And I think that's kind of where you can find yourself in trouble, is just trying to win, and try to make them change or something when you can be the change, like you were saying.
Yeah. And, I know that, Eric, you haven't quite been here a year yet, but I know that we've done enough podcasts. We've talked to enough people on podcasts, and you've seen enough inside the RentPrep office. I don't think you would have any problem agreeing with this whatsoever, but hands down, the most successful landlords that we see and property managers, and somebody that I can think of, and I'll throw him a plug, is Hamilton and Hamilton.
Or Hampton and Hampton.
Hampton, sorry. Hampton and Hampton.
That was a great plug.
Yeah. Sorry, guys.
No, yeah, they were great. And they're out of Central Florida there in Orlando. There's a property management company.
But they've thought of everything. They literally thought of everything. And granted, they've got years and years of experience and a great team around them. And, but that didn't happen on accident either. They went into it knowing we have to foresee everything in order to avoid it. And I think that sort of perception that they have and that way of looking at things, no doubt, and they gave us specific examples when we did a podcast with them on how that's affected them or how that's positively impacted their business. Landlords need to do the same thing. Sit down, make a list, take some time, write things out, put some thought to it. Don't just constantly live in this world of reaction. Think about it. What are some of the things that you can do to make changes? I'm sure, over time, that's exactly how you came about the changes that you made that no doubt had a huge impact on your happiness overall.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, I can think like real quick, and they're all things I've mentioned on the podcast before, but it's just like, all right, learning to actually have a lease. It seems pretty basic, but there's a lot of landlords that don't. Having a late fee policy. Having my tenants pay me through Venmo has been great. Like there's just those things where it's like the first, second, third of the month, and I'm wondering what's going on. And now it's like I've made it so easy for them to pay me that just like your same issue you have with your windshield, it's so easy. But if you could fix that windshield with a click of a button, maybe you would have already done it. But the act of calling and having to talk and get insurance involved, or should I get insurance involved kind of thing, is maybe slowing it up. I've made it incredibly easy for my tenants to pay me rent, and now it's just taken care of, and I don't have to think about it. I get a text message that says, hey, you've got your rent paid.
The story I'm creating in my mind, Eric, is that
I love it. I want to hear this.
I'm being considerate to the windshield guy who has to come out and change the windshield in inclement weather. I'm just waiting for the weather to get nicer. That's all.
I think that what you said there, like, and we talk about this a lot. We kind of laugh about the stories we tell ourselves.
Yeah.
Pretty much. I think we're all full of it.
Yeah.
You walk into scenarios and situations, and you're like, hey, like I know what's going to happen already. I know who that person is sitting across from me on the other side of the phone or whatever it may be. And a lot of times, if you're honest with yourself, you realize that you didn't really know what was going to happen or who that person is. Mm-hmm. And we just kind of walk into these scenarios with all these stories, just stacking stories on top of stories. And, there's not a lot of truth to it.
For sure. And for landlords, it's a tough, it's a tough ask, because in screening, what are you doing? You're basically building stories. You're using a little bit of information, a little bit of gut feeling, and you're being forced to make a very quick decision for a long-term situation. And a lot of it is filling in the blank, what you think is happening here, what you think is going on, what type of person you think this is. So in some ways, I think it's important to have the ability to create a good story. And there's certainly times where it's important to recognize that you're creating a story. Mm-hmm. And it's not reality. It's not based in reality, especially when you're dealing with tenants. Landlords get into this all the time where, you might be sitting at home eating dinner. Next thing you know, you've got the 1,000-yard stare. You're no longer at your dinner table. You're thinking of everything the tenant's doing to destroy your property. You're down the rabbit hole. You're too far gone. You're lost, So yeah, there's no question that we kind of create these stories in our minds and what's happening and what's going on. And most often they're they're far from reality.
Yeah. So I would say for this episode, if there's a big takeaway is if you like what you're hearing, check out Stephen R. Covey's book, 7 Habits of Successful or Highly Successful Individuals.
Highly effective people.
Oh, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. That's right. I've twisted it so much in the story of my mind about being about landlords, but a great book. I think it was written in the 80s, but it still applies so much to things today. So check that out.
Any landlords out there listening, take 5 minutes. It's a challenge. Take 5 minutes, sit down, write it out, use your note on your phone or whatever you got to do. Think about some things that are frustrating you and put a little bit of problem solving to how to take those out of your smaller circle and expand that a little bit to things that you can actually control. And I think in most cases, you're going to find there's a fix. So that's it.
All right. Well, let's end this thing.
All right.
Real quick, everyone, I just wanted to read a review from one of our listeners here. His name is Mr. Anthony Tran, and what he said is that if you're looking to invest in real estate and rent out property, then this is the show for you. Some super valuable information that will help you get results faster and avoid some of the most common mistakes when starting out as a landlord. Check out the RentPrep podcast. Just wanted to say thank you to Mr. Tran there for leaving that review. You can go on iTunes or Google Play, wherever you listen to the podcast. We'd love to see those reviews. All right. Thanks, guys. And until next week, take care.